Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Midday with Trey, your weekly afternoon break. I'm your host, Trey. Let's get right into the show. Today's guest is an assistant professor in the English department who specializes in African American literature. She was also named Professor of the Year in the English department for the 2020-2021 academic year. Let's give it up for Dr. Tabitha Lowery. Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So welcome to the show. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
the set.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So can you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Dr. Tabitha Lowery. I'm an assistant professor here at Coastal. I teach mainly African American literature, but I also teach English 101, English 205, and upper division African American literature courses. I typically focus on lesser known authors. So people like Frances Harper, George Moses Horton, people in that chakra, right? I focus on them in terms of thinking about newer ways to represent Black authors. But I also focus on more canonical authors as well. So Phyllis Wheatley, everybody knows her at this point. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
How did you get involved with, English and literature?
That's a great question. Actually, it's weird. It depends on at what point we're referring to in my undergraduate career. So for instance, when I first started out, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I was able to take English 101, a composition course, and fell in love with the art of argumentation.
Right.
And I was like, oh wow, this is so cool how you could persuade people through writing.
Yeah.
It's a concept that, it's weird, never occurred to me. So I really got into that. Now, after a while, I was asked to join a writing center at Southern Arkansas University, where I got my degree from, and I loved it. So I taught students, or I was helping students how to write and think about ideas and communicate those ideas. And so I really got into that, and I started really getting more into English. And then I decided, probably during the first American Lit survey that I had, or literature survey that I had, that is where I think I did the best, right? My best work. And I fell in love with one of the narratives that we read. It was a captivity narrative. Mary Rowlandson was the author, or so it is assumed she is the author.
Right.
It's a very early Indian captivity narrative. And I fell in love with the ways that she's expressing her experience, and also the ways that she's describing others in her narrative. So there's a lot of talk about Native Americans, and it really drew me to how she's representing them. And I wanted to know more about how are authors representing people who are different from them in early texts. So then that drew me into grad school, into thinking about ways that we think about others in text, mostly people from marginalized communities. And I thought I was going to stick with early American literature for the longest time, up until my dissertation writing. And one of my chairs, or actually my chair, reintroduced me to Phyllis Wheatley and her writing. And I realized this is the type of work I really want to focus on in my career. So it just led to me exploring different ways to think about representations of marginalized identities and groups. So yeah, it was a long-winded answer to say these are the paths I took in order to get where I'm at today.
That's great. Well, you being in the role in a college, what role do you think African American literature could, or can, or should play at the collegiate level?
I think African American literature can fit in many spaces. I also think that exposing students to the messiness of African American literary history is important. Right. And I think that's a field that's less explored in schools. And so what often happens is I feel people are more familiar with the canonical works, right? You have the Phyllis Wheatleys, the Paul Laurence Dunbars, the W.E.B. Du Boises, right? But lesser known authors such as Frances Harper, George Moses Horton, they're coming around the 19th century too, in writing very important works in which many authors actually piggyback off of, right? But we don't hear about those important authors. So I think one way that universities could, or schools could, introduce students to Black authors or African American literature is to expose them to the stories that they haven't heard yet, right? The ways that we can rethink representation through avenues that have yet to be explored. Can I talk about a little bit about what I've done with
Of
that
course,
work?
of course.
So yeah, so I had an opportunity in my dissertation to talk about, I keep bringing Frances Harper up because she's a very important abolitionist writer. And I had a chance to explore, other than just through her education with adults, how else is she educating children through her poetry? And there's a less, like I said, research avenue in which she's thinking about children's work with abolitionism, with uplift ideology, right? So she's thinking about the ways that children can also help toward social justice. And her poetry was repurposed and reused through different editors to try to find avenues for them to think about their own intersectionality as Black children and to give them empowerment in a society that often made them powerless. Right. So I think if we explore more of those types of avenues in universities, I think students will be much more interested in the types of work that we do.
Definitely. So what are some current projects that you're working on now that could relate to African American literature?
Oh, that's a good one. So currently we're doing, me and Dr. Ellen Arnold in the English department are co-creating events for Banned Books Week.
Okay.
And so we previously had an event in September that brought together many students, like I think over 70 students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And faculty members. And people shared their favorite banned books, right? And banned books meaning books that have been censored in usually public schools and libraries, or challenge books that mean libraries, schools have typically taken them out of course and curriculum. So it brought together a large number of students and faculty to share their love for banned books and to read from their favorite ones. So that was wonderful. Now we are continuing, the momentum with this event, and we're trying to also have a banned books club where so students have the opportunity to read maybe a book that as they voted on, they voted on this book. It was out of 3, and we haven't shared the results yet, but there is a book that will be like a common read with the group, and we're all going to read them. So more details about like how we're going to set that up are forthcoming, but we're thinking about in the spring. Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
So we obviously we could tell, but we know you're an extraordinary teacher. You won teacher of the professor of the year in the English department. 2020, 2021. So what can students expect to gain from your classes that they take here at Coastal?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think a lot of students could gain an understanding of the different experiences that African American literature brings to them, particularly, like I said, with lesser known authors. Sometimes people go through different walks of life, right? And you're not aware of those walks of life if you've never been taught about them or have experienced them yourself. So I think understanding different cultures and also being exposed to the different literary movements within African American literature and how those have shaped the ways that authors interact with society and political issues within society, I think is important. So in my classes, we often go over major literary themes such as like double consciousness, uplift, Black arts movement. Recently, I've really gotten into Afrofuturism, so they can expect a little bit of like, speculative fiction, mostly from Octavia Butler, because that's one of my favorite authors right now. I think they can expect to see a broad range of representation in terms of what's considered African American literary traditions, and also a little bit of lesser known facts.
So all great stuff. So
thank you.
I want to thank you for being on the show, taking time out of your day. I hope the audience gained a lot of information. I know I did. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
It is that time again. Time for the hat of the week. The hat for this week is this English beanie. It goes along with our guest who was just here, Dr. Lowery. She's in the English department. And it's just a very comfortable hat. I got it a couple weeks ago at a Meet Your Majors fair, which is basically, students came out and they had a bunch of different majors and they met the people of their majors, their advisors, some of their professors. We just had a good time. And I saw this hat on the table and I originally thought they were giving it out as a raffle, but they were just handing them out. So, I took one. And here it is. I got it specifically for this episode, specifically for this show. So here it is, this English beanie. I don't know where you can get it, so it's limited time only, so I'm gonna keep it forever. Yeah. Now it's time for your weekly update. First, on Wednesday, October 19th, starting at 5 p.m. in the Lib Jackson Theater, the Department of Languages and Intercultural Studies continues its Latin American Film Festival with the film Liquid Truth from Brazil. Next, on Friday, October 21st, starting at 7:30 p.m., the Edwards College brings Columbia City Ballet as they present Dracula, Ballet with a Bite. This full-length ballet combines original choreography and costumes with haunting visuals and graphic special effects. On Wednesday, October 26th, starting at 4 p.m., the History Department continues their Peace and Conflict Lecture and Film Series with the historical film, The Black Robe. Also on Wednesday, October 26th, starting at 4:30 p.m., the Department of Philosophy continues their Philosopher's Corner series with the lecture, The Vegan Imagination, Why Vegans Aren't as Bad as You Thought. A lot of good events are coming up this week, but as always, we didn't have time to touch on them all, so make sure you stay up to date and follow all the Edwards College social media pages down below. We have this nice little graphic here for you, so you can stay up to date and see all the events that are coming up. All right, that wraps up this week's episode of Midday with Trey. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you tune in next week, same time, same place. Bye.